You're gonna what?
I'm on divorce bill.
Do it.
He's my husband too, and I haven't seen him in so long. I don't even know where he
Yeah, he's gonna lose his spot in the club if he's not careful.
Yes, he is.
All right, guys. Yes.
Before we get started, I just wanted to say you're probably one of the more difficult acts to follow. But Carol did a bang-up job.
Where is Carol? I saw her here.
Out there on the phone.
Oh, you should have saved that for her.
Okay, I will.
Save it for her. In the meantime, I'm going to pass this sign-in sheet. If you haven't been here before, this is just, we just like to keep track of how many people are coming to our groups and what we got going on. And also, if you haven't been here before, please get us your name and phone number and email so that we can keep in touch. So we'll start this over here. You can just pass this around. We have a little bit smaller crowd tonight. No doubt it's related to the eclipse, to the solar eclipse.
Probably stuck in traffic.
Does that
Probably-
explain that darkness?
There's always traffic and travel.
Probably stuck in traffic. See, one of the things, if we'd have had this group last week, we could have prepared for this, because one of the things that happens when you're in active addiction, you're completely disengaged from the world. Your world really just becomes, you have tunnel vision. How do I get a hold of what I'm looking for? Where am I going to go to the party tonight? How am I going to get away with this? How am I going to get away with that? You don't pay attention to the news. So it's likely that your loved one, if he's in active addiction, he or she are in active addiction, they didn't even know that there was an eclipse coming. So what you could have done is said, hey, listen, I tell you what, I'll make a deal with you. If there's an act from God, you'll go to rehab, right? And if there isn't one, well, then I'll give you $1,000. You could have used this to your benefit, because I don't even think a lot of people out there would have even known. My name's Rich Jones. I'm the executive director here. I think I know most people, but real quick on my background. Professionally, I'm a clinician. I've worked in a lot of different settings, inpatient, outpatient, community mental health, that kind of thing. I'm also a person in long-term recovery. These letters mean different things that allow you to practice and do things in different settings. At Favor Greenville, we have a little bit of a different approach. We believe in the power of a person's experience. So everyone who works at Favor has their own personal experience dealing with this issue. I'm in recovery. It's been 16 years. I was addicted to alcohol and prescription pain pills. Other things along the way entered the picture, but those were the things that really kind of took me down. You'll hear people use a term, and you may have heard the term. You ever hear this thing called drug of choice? They'll ask people, what's your drug of choice? I don't know that I'm a big fan of that term, but that kind of means, what was the thing that really captured your attention the most? What was the thing that really took you to a bad space? And for me, that was prescription pain pills. I drank for a long time, and the truth is, I probably could have continued to do the drinking thing. Drinking is socially acceptable. You can get away with a lot when it comes to drinking. I was very high functioning, but those pills, man, they took me to another place really, really quick. And this was at the beginning of the opioid epidemic. And I got, it always came from a doctor, and it was just really strange, and I didn't really know how to handle it. I talk a lot about what it must be like to be a young person. I can't imagine being 16 or 17 or 18 years old trying to figure that out. I was 31 years old whenever I hit my bottom, if you will, or had my last drink or a drug. And I had a fully developed brain. I had some life experience. I had something that I could lean on. I had a lot to lose. I had a career. I had a family. Can't imagine what it must be, to be 18 years old and going through that. And so this group is meant to focus on the family side of things, what you're going through if you're dealing with somebody in active addiction, or really any part of the recovery process. And we every other week we do a lecture, and I usually throw up a PowerPoint, and we talk about certain things, but I always like to open it up to the group if you have any pressing issues, and we'll even write them down and make sure we cover them. But does anybody have anything going on that they want to make sure we talk about today? Any certain topics that we need to go over? Yes.
I just want to voice a thank you to Favor. My son started coming to Favor, I don't know, a couple of 3 months ago. Initially he said he was coming, but I found out he really wasn't. And meantime, he ended up taking his car, so I was bringing him to Favor to meet with Mike. He is 22 years old. He started back to college last fall, actually last summer, and had a 3.0 last fall. Parents
Right.
Computer was just screwed up with the grades and all this stuff. Came home at the end of the semester and the truth came out. He's just kind of been spiraling.
Yeah.
Fortunately, got recommendation of favor, and things evolved pretty quickly, because he probably didn't meet with Mike more than half dozen times. But as I said, in the meantime, I took his car.
Yeah.
He didn't have a key to the house, so he had to be in the most miserable, hellacious place you could possibly be. And then last week, on the 11th, he was scheduled to meet with Mike, but unfortunately he was drunk and couldn't make it. So, no, on the 10th. So Mike agreed to meet him on the 11th, and it sounded like he was ready, so I talked to Mike in advance and said, let's talk, get him to do the intake at 4 Circles. So when he had that meeting, he agreed to do the intake.
Yeah.
And that Saturday, the 12th, we took him to Asheville.
Okay.
And the reports are that he's still receptive and wants to do the program. My wife and I leave tomorrow for a 3-day family.
For the family program.
deal. The only negative is we did everything on such a quick turnaround that we found that the insurance is saying they can't cover it. But I've been there and done that before. So,
Yeah, that's always going to be.
But I'm not giving up on that. Mike's writing a letter. I've got a letter from his doctor. So we're
Still going to push that.
Fortunately, was in the position to be able to decide it was more critical to get him there than to get the insurance nailed down.
Yeah.
Ahead of time. But we couldn't be where we are right now without favor and what Mike.
Well, thank you.
did.
Thank you for saying that. You know, the hardest thing about the recovery process, and I know there's a lot of families in here that can definitely attest to this, is how long of a process it is and how you never feel like you hit a finish line. I'm listening to you talk about your story, and it's kind of like things feel like they're going okay for a while, and then what are the red flags and what are the flags that start to come up and the issues that start to pop up that you start to say to yourself, oh, here we go again? Is this starting to happen again? It gets it's very hard as a loved one to get completely comfortable in recovery.
Well, the thing about it, there's no way that my son and I and my wife could have gotten to that point. There was so much friction, and the advice I got from Mike was save that battle. You know, let's keep our eye on the bigger picture and get to where we need to be. Don't feel like you've got to confront him and
Yeah.
the task over everything. But we got to keep our eye on the big picture.
Yeah. Try to avoid, and I'm going to talk a little bit about that tonight on the communication process. Yes, ma'am.
I love the chronicles that come up on WYFF, and I certainly saw the last one, which I thought was excellent. I'm wondering, though, you know, in thinking about this gentleman, unless you have insurance or you have financial, you know, substance where you can send the kids once, twice, whatever, for help, I'd like to see Chronicle address what's not out there and what is out there.
Yeah.
That to me is a hinge pin.
I mean, I think the Chronicle tried to come at it from different angles, and they talked about different programs. Now, they did talk about special populations. If you notice, they talked about pregnant women, and they talked about adolescent boys. And it's really unusual how that works. Like, if you look at any type of special investigation or any type of investigation about programs, they always tend to focus on special populations. And I guess what I'm hearing you say is just in general what's available out there. What if you're 30 years old, 25 years old, 22 years old? What's available? What I can tell you is there's not much. Now, what's interesting is there's a big push to try to increase the number of treatment beds. You'll hear people talk about that, or increase the number of detox beds, and I do think that would help. I mean, obviously, having a facility ready to go when a person's ready to go is important. But what's interesting is when you look into who's in the facilities, you find out it's 70% repeat customers. So what we're not talking about and what we're not doing a good job is how do we keep people from needing to go back over and over again. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does.
So you have two problems. You have actually one. The first problem is, where do we find a place for the person to go if they need? And then the other big problem that's contributing to this is, why do we have to keep doing this over and over again? That was a text message that I got this weekend. I was just coming off a vacation and stuff like that, and trying to get my head back in the game and stuff. And a person was talking about somebody that they had lost, that they knew it wasn't their child, but they knew this kid and had been to rehab 8 or 9 times. So that's not an issue of access. Do you follow me? That's not an issue. That's an issue of, we do not have a good answer as it currently stands. We don't have a good answer for the long-term process. We have some solutions for the short term. Let's get you in here for 30 days. Let's get you in here for 42 days. Let's get you in here for even 90 days. We seem to be able to do that, and we have some willingness for that to be paid for. That'll get paid for by some insurance companies. That'll be paid for by some state governments and stuff like that. But what we don't have an interest in is anybody paying for long-term support, like long-term. Statistically, 5 years before the relapse rates they fall way off after 5 years. In other words, you're never out of the woods, but you're in pretty good shape if you can make it 5 years. The relapse rates drop every year over year, but then when it hits year 5, they fall. It's like they fall off the cliff. Does that make sense? They go way down. So we would argue that a person should have professional, paid for, intensive support for 5 years. That's the part of the puzzle that nobody seems to be willing to pay for. And I don't really know why they're not willing to pay for it. Nobody can really tell you why they're not willing to pay for it, other than we don't really do it that way. What we do is we do short-term rehab. Who in the world ever invented a 28-day rehab? Why 28 days? Where did that come from? Or even 4 weeks, or even 6 weeks? Yeah, that kind of thing. So that's what you're up against. That's what you're up against. Yes, Linda.
I do have something that's come up this week, and I'm trying to take my time about it and ask myself questions and get to know this subject. But my son is asking, he's been in SLA for 9 months now.
SLA, guys, is a recovery house. So he's been in a recovery house for 9 months.
And he's asking if he can come home.
Wow.
So,
Ding, ding.
I don't know.
Man, who wants to answer that question?
Yeah, I need some help.
So that's about as straightforward a dilemma as you can get, right? What's your initial reaction to that?
Well, I'm willing to give it a try. I am.
Yeah.
However, I don't know if his dad I think he's going to put the snafu on it.
Yeah.
And I don't know what else is there?
So, the only other thing, so we get a lot of people, when you think about the continuum of care, if you will, or you think about how it works, a person goes to rehab, and then they go to what used to be called a halfway house. It's now called all kinds of different things. Sober living, recovery residences, extended care. Everybody has a different name for it. It's not rehab. It's a little bit less intense. And then even a place like Sober Living America is even less intense. Mm-hmm. So you have a lot of independence. And then what happens after that? Well, most people, there's really no good answer for that, Linda. Most people try to find a roommate, somebody that they could live with, somebody from other meetings that they're going to, that they get to know. It's anytime there's a transition, it's dangerous. I don't know if you guys know that or not, but even more than time, one of the things that can get a person tripped up is when you transition from one setting to another. So when I moved from Pennsylvania to South Carolina, I've joked around before about my mom, grilling me on do I have a home group, and did I get a sponsor, and have I, got a program? And I'm like, are you serious, Mom? Captain Recovery, yo. It's what I do for a living, and I'm 11 years into this, but transition points can be tricky. Certainly certainly finding the right roommate, that's a very, very important thing for anybody at 9 months. Yes, sir.
I came here under a recommendation. Tricia told me I should sit in. My wife is a member here, sporadically. Depends on her level to but I came in here tonight because I'm trying to get an understanding of what I'm in for.
Okay.
She's an alcoholic. Last year and a half, she stolen from me, lied, almost put us in financial debt, bankrupt us. And this past week, she's been going out every night till midnight,
Yeah.
and she suffers from mental illness, and she's on a number of other disorder drugs. So I don't know what the night's gonna bring, even tonight.
So,
I'm trying to get an understanding of what I'm in for, you know, is there an opportunity to save the marriage? Do I need to get divorced? Or what?
so those last two questions are harder to answer than the first. The first question, I can tell you, I can tell you kind of like what you're in, not what you're in for, but what you're dealing with and what you can expect to a certain degree. I don't think it's fair for any of us to be able to say for sure, you know, can the marriage be salvaged, that kind of thing. I know my marriage was. I was as I shared, and I know it's hard to believe that I could ever be out of control as put together as I am, right? But I was a maniac. I was very unpredictable. I was high functioning in the sense that I still had a job, but in every other sense I was an alcoholic and a drug addict. And so no one would have been betting on our relationship either. Does that make sense? Like if you would have been looking at that 16 years ago, 17 years ago, sitting in a room like this, hearing my wife talk about what she was dealing with, you wouldn't have gone out and said, well, I'm going to bet on that one. So I can tell you when it looks desperate, sometimes it actually works out. What's going on is, and I want to talk. I'm going to tell you what's going on with the brain that's addicted, and hopefully get you an understanding of what's going on there. And I also want to try to provide a context for this, guys, because this is something I've become completely preoccupied with. The stigma around addiction. I'm here to make an argument that we've made about that much progress reducing the stigma around addiction. The stigma around addiction is so strong and so intense and influences you guys in ways you don't even know. Subconsciously, most of the world thinks of people like me with these type of terms. They do not believe addiction is a disease. They don't talk about it like it's a disease. We lose sight of that because in this room we talk of it as it being a disease. But what we're doing, have you ever heard the term preaching to the choir? You know, we're preaching to the choir here. Go out in the regular world, they don't think that. If they think about addiction at all, they think of it as these scumbags, these junkies, these losers, that kind of thing. I had an experience when I was on vacation. And don't get me wrong, I was around a bunch of, really good, kind people. Every year we go to this Christian camp in I guess it would be, what would that be? Western Pennsylvania, Eastern Ohio, kind of like on the border. And let me tell you, 100% clueless about addiction and the concept of it being a disease, completely lost on these folks. And these are not malicious people. Are you following me? These aren't fundamentally judgmental people. They're fundamentally kind people, to tell you the truth. But they just here it's a very interesting conversation because here's how it unfolds. So picture you're at this camp, you're at this Christian camp, you got your little kids running around, you want to make sure that the play date's going well, right? You want to, here we go frolic about, yeah, it's ideal, it's freaking awesome, man. Rich, what do you do for a living? Oh, well, I run this organization called Faces and Voices of Recovery. Oh, that's neat. How'd you get interested in that? Okay. What brings you into that line of work? So now, where am I? I'm at a fundamental crossroads, right? And so I don't say anything, and the conversation goes on, and they begin to talk about how they feel, because, and again, I want to emphasize, it's weird. It isn't even as if they're putting down addicts and alcoholics. It's just the way they're talking. You just know what they're thinking. Does that make sense? They're not saying anything openly negative. You just know what they're thinking. And so I let them go for about 2 minutes until I say, well, I'm a drug addict. And then stuff gets real interesting then, right? It gets real uncomfortable. Oh, well, I think we better get going. It's time to make some s'mores, right? And so the opinion of me shifts in that moment. Goes from like wonderful, nice, good dude, Christian guy trying to save the world to, oh, wow, no wonder his kid's so hyperactive. That, you know, and at no point in time is anyone saying that to me. And I got to tell you on another hand, I got to say this out loud. I could give a shit what they think about me. I really honestly don't care what they think about me. I do care what they think about my kids. Do you follow me? I don't care if they ever utter a kind word about me at all. But I don't want my kids to be stigmatized because of my issue. So this is my struggle that's in my face. And I'm so aware of it on this. I was so aware of it on this trip. And I can imagine that if you guys are dealing with this, if you're dealing with this issue, whether it's with your wife or your child or whatever it may be, that this is influencing you probably whenever you're not even aware of it influencing you. You know we're going to be judged. Because we are going to be judged. And the only reason I'm bringing it up is because there's power in awareness. You can own that a little bit more, and you can take that into your heart a little bit and say, you know what, that's on them. That's on them, and we need to do a better job educating the world. We need to do a better job getting out there and getting in people's faces and really, really challenging this. But I'm telling you, we got a lot of work to do to try to break through this stigma. All the rallies and the events and we're having and all this shouting from the rooftops and having these concerts in Washington and stuff, I'm starting to wonder if any of it's actually working. I'm starting to question, because I think we keep talking to ourselves. We keep having events where it's all of us there. It's all of us, and we're kind of talking to the already converted. How do I actually convert that crowd that I was around that had never even really thought about it, until when they did think about it, what they automatically thought was this stuff. And they probably aren't even aware that they thought about it. Would you agree with that? It's probably this is so ingrained in American culture that that's what a drug addict and an alcoholic is, that I don't even think the majority of people out there are aware that they're stigmatizing people. There was a survey done by Johns Hopkins, and some of the results of this survey, only 22% of respondents said that they would be willing to work closely on a job with a person with a drug addiction. Only 22%. Now, 90% of them already are, and probably 90% of them that were answering this question are the drug addict. Okay? But whenever you try to conceptualize it, only 22% were willing to even acknowledge or say, yeah, I'd be willing to do that. Now, you compare that with mental illness, because this is the other thing that they'll say. They'll say, like, well, mental illness is stigmatized. No, not really. Not really. 62% said, I'd work with somebody with a mental illness. So mental illness and substance use are in two different categories, guys. Addicts are thought of as the lowest of the low. And then just some other things. 64% said that employers should be able to deny employment to people with a drug addiction compared to 25% with a mental illness. Now, it isn't that this person's actively using drugs at the work site. That's not what's being asked here. It's like, Rich had an addiction. Should he be denied employment? Yes, you can deny that if you're identified that way. And you can try to parse this, and you can try to put a spin on this and say, well, maybe the people were confused. Maybe they didn't understand what does addiction mean, what does addiction not mean, and yeah, addicts still, and addicts. Look, it's either a disease or it isn't, guys. It's either a disease or I'm going to make a case tonight that it's a disease. But as a society, we got to pick one side of the fence or another, because I need to know what we're dealing with. If the world's going to think that my people are scumbags and drug addicts and unredeemable, then we got to know that that's what we're up against, and don't just pat us on the head and say it's a disease when you think that it's a moral failing. And if you think it's a, yes, Jen?
I think a lot of times mental illness can be seen as, well, they couldn't help it. You know?
Yes,
And
that's
I think
right.
drug addiction, people still assume it's a choice, you know. I mean,
Yes.
That's what you do, well, that's your fault because you started doing it to begin with.
Right.
And I mean, you know, and I hate to say this, but when I was growing up, I mean, I guess I'm probably falling, I'm embarrassed to say, but in that category.
No, I
where-
appreciate you being honest about
I mean,
that.
you know, I mean, I just thought, oh my gosh, if you use drugs, you're probably sitting on a corner somewhere, you know. And it's only since I've been in this situation for the last 7 or 8 years that I've really changed, of course, my mindset totally. But if I'm talking amongst my friends, you know, a lot of times, you know, and I will say very distinctly that I think it's a physical problem,
Yeah.
you know. And I think it comes across sometimes as kind of sounding like you're making excuses
Yes.
for your child's behavior.
Yeah.
But I really believe that. I mean, I do believe it's a physical.
So it doesn't, well, the other part of it is it doesn't have to be about making excuses. This is the other thing. That's that side of the argument. You're making an excuse for bad behavior. Nobody's making an excuse for bad behavior. Bad behavior is bad behavior. You can't make an excuse for
But
it.
I feel like, I don't know, I think even around my contemporaries, I think it's still very difficult for, if you haven't encountered it in your life, it's hard for people to understand that.
Here's the other part of it, though. It isn't whether or not you've encountered it. It's whether or not you've acknowledged it. Because this is where it gets real. They've encountered it. They have just never said anything about Uncle Joe passing out in the mashed potatoes every Thanksgiving. Addiction is so much more present than any, even these folks that I was talking to, even the folks that would judge me. I know I will go out on a limb and say I can factually, not even factually, I could predict that it's in their family too. It's just you've been able to keep the lid on it, and you've decided to stick your head in the sand, and you've decided that you're just not going to talk about it, and you're going to cross your fingers, and you're going to hope that, you know, so and so grows out of it, or some kind of miracle happens, and all of a sudden they stop, and we're just going to hope for it, and we're not going to acknowledge it. And as long as we don't say, then we can go ahead and judge. But the moment we say, now we have a problem. So I'm not going to admit, and this is where it really bothers me, because what it does is it leads to the fact, I don't know if we've talked in here before, have we talked about only 10% of people who have a substance use disorder actually ever get help? Have we ever shared on that? It's basically the same people getting help over and over again. It's only ever 10% of the people. And it's not because they can't find help, believe it or not, it's because they don't want help. So the world has painted this picture where there's all this like, come on, we'll give you help, or people saying, I need help, and people being told we can't help you, but that's not really how it is. People don't want help. And I believe the stigma contributes to that immensely. I feel like I butchered that. Do you guys get where I'm coming from? I figure like I didn't get that across clearly. Yes, ma'am.
There's all kinds of addictions, food, gambling, all kinds. And what my concern is, what causes, I don't know if you're ever going to live a lecture on this, but I would like to know what actually causes some people to go into these states of addiction where others don't have any.
I will tell you that. I'll tell you that in a couple minutes.
Okay.
Does anyone else have any questions or comments about that part of
I
it?
got one more question, just to kind of, I'm trying to understand this, I don't have any idea what I'm dealing with. There's been instances where there are planned dinners, texts going back and forth on the way home, and then disappear,
Yeah.
and she's at the bar again.
Yep. So I'm going to tell you all about that. That question I can answer. That's one of the questions I can definitely answer. I'll get to that in like 2 slides. So what does this do to parents? And we know this. Parents especially, not so much spouse to husband and wife, more parents. A lot of guilt, a lot of shame, and a lot of feeling like a failure. And what this does is it leads parents into this state of paralysis around the issue. You won't want to do anything. It's almost too painful to even look at. And you start blaming yourself, and you start feeling like you're a failure, especially in today's world. And I'm going to talk a lot about, a lot of the things about today's image-driven world that contribute to this. But this makes it very, very difficult. It's the way that you're subconsciously impacted by the stigma. It's a disease, but it's unlike any other disease. If you get a chance, listen to the Recovery Cartel podcast. I interview my wife on the podcast. And in it, she talks about it. I think she talks about it in there that nobody came by and gave her a casserole whenever I was diagnosed with addiction. Nobody came by to sit with her for a while to comfort her when I was diagnosed with addiction. Everybody did the opposite. They stay away from you whenever your loved one's diagnosed with addiction. There is no let's wrap our arms around this person and comfort them. So on one hand, we're told it's a disease, but it's a disease unlike anything else that we've encountered. And so that's a very unique issue that you're up against if you're a family member. So it's a brain disease. Here's a couple things to think about. A couple things, especially for those guys, and I'm going to talk about who becomes addicted and why they don't. But the first thing I'll tell you is the debate is over. It's a brain disease. This is Nora Volkow. She's the head of the National Institute of Drug Abuse. She has come out and said this. This isn't just, Rich Jones over at Favor saying this. This is what she does. She's a medical doctor. She's a scientist. There's a fundamental brain change involved with addiction. Your brain was one way before you became addicted. You started using these drugs. Now, what are the factors why certain people become addicted and other people don't? The number one factor is how old you are when you start. It's called age of onset, age of first use. So I was 14 when I started messing around with alcohol. That makes me much more vulnerable than somebody who waited till they were 21. So that's the first indicator. The second indicator is there is a genetic vulnerability. It doesn't mean it's a guarantee, but it increases the likelihood if it runs in your family. About 40 to 60% increased likelihood. And then also the particular substances that are being abused. Certain things are more addictive than other things. Okay? Those are the three factors. Other than that, it's like any other disease. There's a luck of the draw to it. So think about something like type 2 diabetes. Not everybody, type 2 diabetes, you give it to yourself. Agreed? You're not born with type 2. You're born with type 1. Type 2 is a behavioral it's a disease that results from behavior. Now, not everybody who eats wrong or doesn't exercise or doesn't take care of themselves gets type 2 diabetes. So it's the same type of an idea. Not everybody who started drinking too young will wind up with addiction. Not everybody who had it in their family will wind up with addiction. So there's also that part of it that it doesn't strike. Just like not everybody who smokes cigarettes winds up with lung cancer. And then you'll hear a story where somebody didn't smoke at all and they do wind up with lung cancer. So we also have to acknowledge that there's that part of it that we don't really understand why it happens to some people and why it doesn't happen to others. But it is a brain disease. The other thing, the Surgeon General. Now the Surgeon General, it took 40 years for the Surgeon General even to comment on addiction. But the Surgeon General, actually probably longer than that, more like 60 years, has come out. And I'm going to do a Saturday workshop just on what the Surgeon General said, because I think it's very valuable information. The Surgeon General has come out and said this is a brain disease. This is not a moral failing. This is the chief doctor in the nation, right? Again, this is a big deal. There's a lot of science behind this. There's a lot of information behind this. It's settled. Addiction is not a moral issue. It's not a matter of choice. When your wife is texting back and forth, and I'm going to go over the symptoms, but when she's texting back and forth on the way home, she's thinking about coming home. I did that. Well, this is way before text messaging. I was using like smoke signals. But I called my wife. I'm coming home right after work. Or I'm going to stop and have 2 beers or something like that. And not show up until 5 in the morning. What happens is that because of the way the brain changes, when I use any mood or mind-altering chemical, it sets off this compulsive use. I use from that point forward out of control without any volition. I had a choice to not take the first one, and I had a chance to not take the first one. But as soon as I took that first one, it sets off this process of compulsive, out of control use and behavior, and all the other things that go along with that. And what that phenomenon comes from is the depletion of dopamine. How about if I go over that?
I ask this question, but what gets her to, she's driving home,
Yeah.
and what distracts her from driving home and also just pulling off the road and going to a walk?
So the second thing, so the first thing is that compulsive use. The second thing is this thing called preoccupation and craving. So you wind up craving these drugs. Have you ever had a craving for anything? Have you ever had a craving for an Oreo cookie or smoking a cigarette? Imagine that times 100. You're in your car driving home, and that craving comes from the brain. I feel like I'm going to have to, we're going to have to do this, okay? And I know some of you have seen it before, but please just, and this is the part that they have that's a done deal. There's a brain, a really huge brain, nasty looking brain, right? All right, so the part of your brain that you're able to think with is called the frontal cortex. It's located right here. That's where all reasoning takes place. Addiction occupies the midbrain, and the midbrain will always win out over the frontal cortex. It will always win out because this is necessary for survival. This is what gets you to eat food. This is what gets you to drink water. Does that make sense to everyone? So your reasoning, your pros and cons. I should drive home. I said I was going to be there. I said I was going to be home for dinner. That is never going to win when you're hit with a craving. And the reason that you're hit with a craving is because over time, this part of the brain, the dopamine system, malfunctions. It's like the pancreas in type 2 diabetes. The pancreas stops producing insulin. That stops producing dopamine. So you're in this constant state of seeking replacement dopamine. You're in this constant state of seeking a solution for that situation. That's why a person will be doing great. That's why a person will be doing everything that they're supposed to do. Go to work, get in the car, and drive home and take a right rather than a left. And it's hard to describe what it's like to be in that state of thinking if you've never been in that state of thinking. The word obsessive doesn't even really do it justice. It's an ever-present thought. It's an ever-present thought. So when I would be at work, if Linda and I were working together and we were talking about a project that we were going to be working on, while we were talking about it, you would be watching, you would look like I'd be completely engaged with her. I'd be talking. But as true as I'm standing here, guys, in the back of my mind, I'm thinking like, I got to get a drink. Where am I going to do this? How am I going to do this? Where am I going to go after work today? Who's going to be there? What else might they have? Like literally, this is the tape that's playing in my head. And it plays in my head so often that I don't even really notice that it's there. Does that part make sense? I don't even realize that that's weird. I thought everybody on the planet walked around like that. When I first got into recovery and they explained to me that I had a preoccupation and they said that this obsession, that it could go away and stuff like that, I was completely dumbfounded. I was like, you mean that's not how the world works? You mean you guys aren't walking around like that, thinking about where you're going to get a drink? I just thought that was naturally how human beings worked. You always thought about where you could get what you wanted. You always thought it. So what's happening is if you're getting in the car and if you don't manage that, and when I say manage it, that's where all the recovery stuff comes in. That's where talking to a therapist and talking to a coach and protecting yourself and not having money in your pocket. If you don't manage that, you will just go. On any given day, you'll just go. Now, the good news is that after time, your brain can reset. It really is good news. This isn't a permanent condition. You can get better from this, but you have to stop. And you have to stop for a little while. It takes longer than like 2 weeks for your brain to kind of heal. So what's going on is she's acting on this, she or he or whoever it is, they're acting on this obsessive compulsive thinking, and the only thing that gives them relief is actually going to the bar. And when we go to the bar, guys, also know that we're telling ourselves we're only going to have one drink. Like no one's saying I'm going to the bar to stay there all night. Like it literally, you don't wind up staying there all night until you're there and you have that first drink and it hits you, and then that takes over and it kind of starts running the show. Now, that explains why you go to a bar. There really is no such thing as happy hour at the crack house. So that's a whole different deal. You go to the crack house, or you go get heroin, or you go get pills, 100% based on just the idea of the obsession being overwhelming. You're not only going to get one, you know you're going to be there. Well, you may tell yourself that, but that's a little bit different. The alcohol part of it also has that social part, that social acceptance. That's one of the things with alcohol, people who are trying to overcome alcohol, that's when it makes it a little more difficult, because there is such a thing as let's just go out for a couple beers after work. There really is. I don't know that this conversation occurs a lot in the break room. Hey man, you want to go out for a couple bags of heroin? I don't think that happens, that I'm aware of. Although the way things are going, it could be. And we have to joke, maybe we shouldn't joke about that, but that isn't part of the deal. But it is part of the deal to say, let's go get a couple beers. And then boom, game on. What questions about the brain? What questions or comments? Yes, ma'am.
I'm just learning a little bit more from my son, what I'm going through with him and other addicts like dealing with him. And I think you touched on it too at one point, that they're also very selfish. So part of it is they want it. They're focused on, I'm just gonna have one beer, but they're also very selfish people.
See, I don't agree with that part of it. I don't agree with that terminology. When you're in that state of mind, you're selfish in the sense that you got to get that.
But like my son is finally realizing now, and he's admitted sometimes, like where we had family functions, he had no intentions on drinking or doing drugs. He was just selfish and didn't want to go because he didn't want to deal with people. It wasn't that he was set out that day to get drunk or do drugs. He's realizing now there were many times in his life he was just selfish. He wasn't.
Well, that may be. But people who don't drink or do drugs are selfish too.
Exactly, that's what I was about to say.
Yeah.
So when you're a selfish person and then you're also an addict, the two together, I think.
You probably can have certain personality types that are. But I will tell you that not everybody who is in the recovery process has the same personality type. They're very individualized, and so and the reason why I'm saying this is because there is this general idea that I personally think is counterproductive, because I think it feeds into the stigma that all drug addicts and alcoholics are liars, cheaters, and thieves, and selfish and self-centered. And I don't believe that to be the case. I think that when I'm in active addiction, I will do things that are selfish. Does that make sense? Like if I were to go out tonight and use, then I would wind up doing some things that were selfish. But at the core, I'm not a selfish person. Now there is such thing as selfish people, right? There are different personalities. So your son may be identifying in a different way. And I get that too. That's probably therapeutic for him to kind of try to work through that.
Well, and I'm also just trying to learn and understand this whole thing myself, but he said several times, and he called from rehab the other day, and he sounds a lot more positive than he has this whole time. He's feeling the first time he was in rehab was too rushed. He was not ready. It was boom, 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 this is where you're going, but this time he feels more ready for himself, which is good. What scares me, and I'm trying to understand, is he keeps saying that he's scared because he doesn't feel he has a bottom.
He doesn't. You got to remember, he's also parroting a lot of stuff he's hearing in rehab. He's.
Well, no, because people have asked him, and I've heard the therapist ask him, have you reached your rock bottom? Well, he's totaled enough cars. He's been arrested. He's been in the hospital.
Yeah.
I'm thinking, how is that not your rock bottom?
That hasn't. But you got to remember that has nothing to do. That has nothing to do with whether or not he can do recovery.
That's what I'm trying to understand.
Yeah, that's it's a good point. So what he needs to do recovery is, first of all, complete his program where he's at now. Then there's going to be some recommendations for him to do afterward. If he keeps doing what he's supposed to do, he doesn't have to have this rock bottom thing figured out. what will happen is he will, like a recovery lifestyle, will start to become a reward in and of itself. And it won't be so much about, well, could I do that again? Have I had my rock bottom? It'll just be more about, I like what I'm doing now. And you keep doing it. Especially, he's younger, right?
He's 20.
Yeah, especially when you're 20 years old. I mean, when think about any of us when you're 20 trying to figure out life, right? I mean, it's not an easy thing to do under the best of circumstances. I would just encourage him to be like, keep doing what you're doing, son. Keep doing what you're doing. You're doing great. Keep going to the program. Keep talking to your therapist. Keep being honest with your therapist. You follow me? Mm-hmm. I would just pound away at that. And for your peace of mind, I wouldn't get too caught up in some of that other stuff that you're hearing and focus more on his actions. And if he's there and he's doing what he needs to do, then I would go ahead and take that. Does that make sense? Now, do you feel like you understand what's going on with the brain, or do we need to talk more about
I do have one other question. My wife is trying to quit alcohol.
Yeah.
The last 6 months has been sporadic. She's had some good progress where she didn't touch alcohol. But things have gotten worse. It's amped up everything, and I'm not sure if it's the alcohol that is suppressing a number of other things. I'm not sure if there's some physiological change that's occurring in the brain that's resulting in what I'm dealing with now. But in some respects, it seems like it's just now that she's trying to quit, it's getting even worse.
Yeah, a lot of times you'll hear that. A lot of times you'll hear when the person stops drinking. Let's just use drinking. I keep saying drinking, but it could be anything, right? It could be any substance. When a person stops drinking, what you'll find is a lot of the emotions that were being suppressed and being numbed, they start to come up, and people don't really know how to deal with those. Again, the trick to this process is to stay in the recovery process, because that all gets better. And it's very hard for family members because recovery is not a linear process. So how we want recovery to be is Rich enters recovery on X date, and from that point forward makes steady progress, and then winds up, living happily ever after, a life of sobriety, right? That's what we want it to be, and that's how I wish it was, guys. I wish that's what I could tell you. But anybody in here who's gone through this with their loved one or been through it themselves knows that that's not how it is, right? It's 1 step forward, 3 steps back. It's 3 steps forward, 6 steps back. Now, the good news is, as long as a person keeps trying, a lot of people don't talk about this, but it's about a 70% success rate if people keep trying, which in terms of a chronic disease is pretty good, but most people quit trying. Does that make sense? Here's the dilemma that we have. 90% of folks will quit. Screw it, I tried, this is too hard, I've been going to these meetings for 6 months and life still sucks. I went to rehab 8 times and nothing got better. Screw it, I'm done. And then, boom. But if you keep going, and what do I mean by trying? Going to your therapist, going to your meetings, going to seeing your psychiatrist, changing and trying to lead a different lifestyle on where you spend your time, for example. If you keep at this, people will get better. People get better. The trick is, how do you tolerate? And guys, I get it. It's super hard to tolerate the process. I mean, that is something that's very difficult. I know what you're sitting there thinking right now is, come on, dude, that's bullshit. I can't tolerate this process, because the process is so what? Difficult. And I say all the time, the main reason that people don't think it's a disease is because we act like such jerks when we're using. You don't act that way if you're dealing with diabetes. You don't act that way if you're dealing with cancer. When she's in the middle of that state, it's very hard to tolerate.
Yeah, there's a concern. I mean, I understand that. I'm an engineer by trade, so my thinking is, as long as I know the rate of recovery, I can come up with an algorithm and predict what's going to be on.
Yes.
That's not going to work. My concern is the in-between. She drives blacked out drunk.
Yeah.
So she can kill herself, kill somebody else.
Yeah.
The ironic part of it, because her mother was killed by a drunk driver.
Yeah.
Her mom was an alcoholic. And so you would think some basis of reasoning that would slow her down a bit.
Yeah. Yeah. So you're bringing up a real good point. You can't fit that. You cannot fit that factor into the algorithm, and so that heightens. And I'm sure people in this room can relate to this, because you're talking about drinking and driving. You could also be talking about heroin use. You could also be talking about some other stuff. There are factors that come in that just make you say, I can't wait for the process. And that's where you'll hear people start talking about, well, do we need to maybe do rehab? Do we need to do things like, I mean, does she need to get a DUI? Okay, so I'm saying this, guys. Sometimes a DUI and legal involvement is very uncomfortable, has a lot of downside, but there can be a blessing in disguise in a situation like that. If you're sitting here and you're worried literally about safety and welfare, maybe you call the police when she pulls out and she's driving down the road drunk and she gets a DUI, because now what starts to happen is other people other than you start to try to control her. I'm not telling you to do that. Actually, I guess I sort of am. I'm telling you to consider that contingency. Consider that as a possible variable in the algorithm. You know, that maybe the legal system getting involved has more influence or control than you do at this time. And I think if that applies to you in other circumstances too, sometimes you have to call the police if the person's at the home. Sometimes you have to call the police if the person's in immediate danger. I'm actually going to talk about that tonight. But that is the mitigating factor. That is the wild card in this whole thing. What do I do? How do I wait for my loved one to recover through this process when they're doing such dangerous things? The only answer that we've come up with to this point, and I think it's an insufficient answer because I think it's unrealistic, is we just put people in rehab over and over again. Boom, go back to rehab. Boom, go back to rehab. Boom, go back to rehab. And what's the reason we put people in rehab?
Because you don't want to deal with it.
That's exactly right, ma'am. I'm so glad you said that. I didn't have to. She said because you don't want to deal with it. Not that you don't want to deal with it, you don't have to deal with it. If they're in rehab, they're safe. Rehab is really a place where you can get the person where you can sleep at night. I mean, that's honestly what it is.
Like insurance.
And insurance will pay for it, but that's become a solution to she's driving blacked out. But this may be the only place where people are going to talk straight with you about this. That doesn't mean that it doesn't start all over for you 30 days later. And that's the stuff. You got to do rehab from time to time, right? You have to do rehab from time to time because things are going to get so dangerous that you got to do something. It's like the equivalent of putting somebody in the hospital. You got to get them in the hospital. Pneumonia has gotten so bad, they got to get better. But you got to be real honest about what exactly that means. And you have to be prepared, like in your situation, man, where he had to go right back. Because the rehab didn't fix anything, did it? No.
Well, before he got out, the last few weeks before I got out, his therapist and I were kind of like thinking, because he was more resistant at the end.
Yeah.
So they told me to expect him to relapse.
Yeah.
I didn't expect it to be 2.5 weeks.
But yeah, and in that case, that's good because that program there maintained a lot of contact with you, and you were able to do something. But the question becomes, how many times can you do that? How many times do you do that, especially when you feel like it's life-threatening, which you did in your circumstance? The symptoms, guys, for substance use disorder, we've done this a bunch of times. Tolerance, it takes more and more of the substance to get the same effect. Withdrawal, you don't have the substance, you feel sick, you get the substance, you immediately feel better. Inability to control, that's what I was talking about. I was going to go out for a couple beers. I wound up waking up 4 days later in Las Vegas. That didn't really happen. That's from a movie called Hangover. Can't cut down. I'm only going to drink on the weekends, and I just can't stick to it. I'm only going to drink, 2 beers, and I wind up drinking 22 beers. That did happen. Role failure. I can't go to work. I can't go to school. Interpersonal problems, the fact that you guys are here probably indicate that they meet this criteria. Somebody's worried about me, is causing problems. Use despite physical or psychological health problems. If I know I have a bad liver and I continue to drink, that would be an example of that. If I know I have depression and I continue to smoke marijuana, that would be an example. Use in physically hazardous situations. This is driving under the influence. You could make an argument that if you're using heroin, you're always using in a physically hazardous situation. Would you agree with that? Any heroin use meets that criteria.
Yes.
Any heroin use. Preoccupation and craving, again, super intense, can't get it out of your head, that kind of stuff. And avoiding non-party activities. The only thing I do is go places where alcohol is being served. I really don't bother with my niece's birthday party unless there's going to be alcohol there, that kind of. So that, and if you meet 6 of those criteria, 6 of this criteria in the past year, you fall into a category called substance use disorder severe, which is technically addiction. What's interesting about the word addiction, guys, is it's never really used in any of the literature. It's not a healthcare term. The healthcare term is substance use disorder severe. And you'd have to have a pattern of those symptoms. So any questions about diagnosing this stuff or understanding what's going on with this from a technical standpoint? Oh, excuse me. And it's like a full-time job. You spend a great deal of time doing it.
I just want to make one statement.
Yes.
On Netflix, there's a program, actually an hour or 2 long program on alcohol
Is there?
and how it affects your brain. I was
Yeah.
watching about 15 minutes of it before I came here. England has just made a law you can't have more than 9 pints of beer a week. And
How are they going to enforce that?
I don't know, but it's interesting. If you have Netflix, you should go on it and because it talks about this
I'd like
guy
to see that.
wore an ankle bracelet and they tested how much his alcohol affected his system through sweat. It was really
Yeah.
interesting.
I saw that as well. It was Surgeon General, like they said that was the proper number of drinks.
Oh, okay.
Anything more or less was bad, but yeah, no,
It was
it's not a
Eng-
law.
It was England though.
I know. I watched the whole program.
Oh.
Yeah. They have it here too. It's 15 here. 15 drinks. They did not pints, but 15 drinks per week. No more than 5 on one occasion.
They say units is what they're measuring.
Yeah. Yeah.
Interesting.
Just half that for women.
And it's 7. Yes,
That
ma'am.
was the same in
What if
England.
you have somebody that drinks every day, but they don't have 6 of those?
So they would probably have 1 and 2. If you're drinking every day, you do have 1 and 2. It's physically impossible to not have 1 and 2. You don't know about these because the only way you would know this is if they actually tried. And the only way they would know, I'm talking about a genuine try. So in the late 90s, I was in this zone of always trying to quit drinking. And it wasn't even like trying to quit drinking because somebody was mad at me. I was genuinely trying. So you'd have to talk to the person. Are they having any problems at work or school? If not, they don't meet that one. You'd have to really go through this with the person. Here's another one. Where is it? This one, preoccupation or craving. You would never know that. Only the person would know that. So whenever you say that, what I say is you really don't know whether they're going through that stuff until, how do you find out? You have to sit down and talk to the person. And I know that presupposes that they would be honest with you, but it's really the only way you can figure it out. There is no x-ray for addiction. There is no DNA test, there's no blood test or anything like that. It would be a heck of a lot easier if it was. Because what's the one thing that everybody can do? They can explain how this isn't me. I mean, if you give me a minute, I can explain to you how this really wasn't me. Especially when you're talking about drinking. Especially when you're talking about drinking. Go ahead.
I feel like for us, it's a clear admission. He admits that, the Xanax is an issue. But he says alcohol is an issue, but I believe that he still thinks he can drink.
That happens almost across the board.
Yeah, and it was like, well, I can still, and even after rehab, I still believe that he thinks he can drink.
Yeah, so the comment is you got a person who's on, let's just call a harder drug. Let's just use the term a harder drug, prescription drug, or maybe crack cocaine or heroin or something. And I want to quit doing that, but I can drink again. that is very, very common. And what a person needs to do with that, well, we would recommend that don't even take the chance. You know, if somebody came to me, but the second best thing would be if that person was still going to see a therapist or going to recovery meetings and stuff, if he could, I have people do that with me all the time. I allow them to talk about that, and what I do is I let them paint themselves in a corner. Let's see how this is going, and it never works. And when it doesn't work, sometimes people have to come to their own experience of that. It shouldn't be that way. You would want them to vicariously learn from other people. You know, I really, really, really wish that everybody who came to Favor listened to me. And you guys wish it too. Because if they did, I would tell them, never again anything now starting today.
But you know what, Chris, of course, it's been 7 or 8 years. He didn't tell me this, but he told his sister that where he is now is the first time he's realizing he can't smoke weed.
Yeah.
I mean, I think he always thought, you know, he did everything else, but he could stop that but still smoke weed.
Yeah.
And I think it's just now.
Listen,
If
guys,
that stays, that's one thing.
if you really want me to get honest with you, if you really want me to tell you the truth, we all have thought that. Every single one of us in recovery have thought that. And there are people that are in the rooms there are people in other parts of recovery programs that are still taking pills. Okay? They're just getting them from a doctor and they're prescribed and they're telling themselves it's okay. The truth is that we paint this black and white picture of recovery, that a person's either in or they're not. And what I'm here to tell you is that based on my professional and personal experience, there's all this stuff in between. And that if a person can just keep at it, if they can keep talking to somebody, if they can keep showing up at meetings, this has been Chris's experience.
Yes.
If you really want to see it lived out, the only thing that Chris has done is he has never quit coming.
Right.
You know, and now what happens then is as he starts talking to enough people over time while he's making these mistakes and he's screwing, eventually like the evidence becomes overwhelming and you have me saying to the person like, come on dude, are you serious? It didn't work. It didn't work. It didn't work. Can you see it didn't work? It didn't work. Oh well, maybe I did it wrong that time. And then the only true tragedy, the only failure, and it really isn't a failure because we can always do a better job, is when the person quits. Not when the person relapses. It's when the person quits. And I believe that professionals, us, and in Favor, I'll put us in this category, we need to do a better job at reconnecting with the person. We need to do a better job. We need to develop a system where we're like on that person when they're not showing up. I will tell you though, the way the system is currently set up, that doesn't really exist. If the person stops coming, I mean, I would like to think that here we try to the best of our ability with the limited resources we have. But most places, if you stop showing up, what's the response? And the system, what does the system do? It says, well, wait till you hit bottom and come back. We don't think that that's going to ultimately work when it comes to getting through this issue. But as family members, the one thing, the one area that you might be able to influence, or the one area that you might be able to help with, would be just relentlessly sending that message. Go talk to your therapist about that. Go ask your sponsor what he thinks about smoking weed only. Go back to the meeting and bring it up to the group. Try to avoid arguments about it. You'll never win that argument. How about this? I will put this presupposition out. You will never talk a drug addict out of anything. You will never be in a debate. Like if Terry's the addict and we're arguing and she's like, it's okay to smoke weed. And I'm like, no, it's not, Terry. It's bad for you. It leads to the cascade and it sets off the addiction again. Terry's not going to be like, oh, never thought of that, Rich. Okay, I quit. That's not going to happen. That's just not going to happen. Now they may, if they're coming around and are at the right type of program where people are listening to them and allowing them to actually express themselves and giving them room to work this out, they may come to that conclusion on their own. This is what you're talking about with Chris. He's starting to come to that conclusion on his own because we've given him the latitude, and other people that he's talked to have given him the latitude to talk about that and work that out, rather than saying, no, that's not how it works. you know that's not how it works. You got to quit everything. And we are one of the few places that won't talk to people like that. The default setting is to give people a speech. It makes you feel better if you're giving somebody a speech. It just does. It's called the writing reflex. It's just, and I'm not talking about family members. I think you guys should go ahead and give all the speeches you want, right? I mean, give speeches. You know, I'm talking about us. I'm talking about us. Do you guys get that the difference there? If you're giving speeches, and even then you might want to reconsider it, because you're probably like exhausting yourself.
Well, I think you're exhausting yourself, and I think it's closing up whatever openness has been opened up
Yeah.
through recovery.
Yeah.
So it's terribly hard.
It's terribly hard, and I'll tell you, it is so. I will give you one other, you know, when it comes to like trying to delineate between prescription drugs and drinking, or even prescription drugs and marijuana now, which is a new thing too. Like marijuana used to be a drug. It just has recently not become a drug. And it is one of the hardest conversations to pull off. It's one of the, when you have somebody who has the mindset of, my problem was X, cocaine, Xanax, but I can drink, that is a very, very hard, it's very hard to get them to go from here to there. I think you have to do it over time. And most people find out through their own experience. And what happens is a lot of people try to do this. They try to control it or they try to cut down. And then when they fail at it, then they have to start saying to themselves, what's going on here? Does that make sense? Oh, I'm not addicted to Oreo cookies. I'm good. By the way, Oreo cookies are highly addictive. Don't make no mistake about it. There's probably some in the kitchen out there. And you know, I eat one, then I eat 12. I'm going to have to eventually start having a conversation with myself. People, that's where the word denial comes in, because people say that I'm able to deny that. I'm able to step back from that. I'm able to. Whenever we argue with somebody, we actually feed into their denial. I don't know if you know that or not, but if I argue with Jen about any problem she has, so if I tell Jen, you got to quit smoking. Cigarettes are bad for you. And Jen looks at me and goes, I haven't been smoking that long, and who cares? It's not a big deal anyway. You're just being judgmental. As she says that out loud to me, she actually believes it. And so by me arguing with her, I'm actually creating the exact opposite of what I want to have happen. By me arguing with her and telling her that, like, you got to quit smoking, the Surgeon General said it's bad for you, it causes lung cancer. The more she argues with me, the more she believes her position. It's human nature when we take a stance. It's why we can't have a political conversation anymore in America. Because all we do is yell at each other about it. And the more you debate and you yell at each other about anything, the more you believe it. The more you believe it. So while you're sitting here telling me that I'm drinking too much, let's just use your wife's example, or actually we'll use my example. Here I am, I'm in a bind again. I was out much later than I should have been, and you're going to tell me that I drink too much, and I'm going to tell you how no. I'm 28 years old. Everybody around me drinks that much. What's a big deal? What are you talking about? That's not a problem. And you're saying you don't understand it's destroying your life, and I'm saying it's not destroying my life. Kevin does it too. And as soon as I start saying that, I'm believing it. Do you follow me? Like, I'm literally believing what I'm saying. I'm telling myself my own story. Now you get more angry at me and you dig in your heels, right? Because that's what you're going to do, because now you're pissed. You're killing yourself, Rich. So here it comes. Boom. There's no doubt you drink way more than everybody. Do you remember last Thanksgiving whenever you got... You're talking about last Thanksgiving? Now you're insane, Linda. You're the one that needs help. You're talking about something that happened 7 months ago. Do you see how this... And now what am I? I'm now in a position of righteousness. Not only have I disagreed with everything you said, I have flipped the script on you, and you are now the persecutor, talking and yelling at me about something that happened in Thanksgiving. And oh my God, I cannot believe that you would do that. How am I? You make me want to drink. You make me want to drink. You're part of the problem. And now you don't even know what to say to the person, and you're literally thinking to yourself, how the hell did we wind up here?
What the hell's wrong with me?
What is wrong with me? I'm insane.
I'm crazy.
I'm telling you, if you want to get in the head of somebody who dealt with this. And again, hopefully, if you, especially those of you who've known me for a while, you know I'm a relatively reasonable person, relatively intelligent, relatively. I have a lot of common sense. Listen to the podcast where my wife talks about the way I made her feel insane, the way I made her question reality. And I got to tell you, I was not doing that because I was a diabolical person. I'm not a bad guy. I wasn't born a bad guy. I'm not a sociopath. I'm not selfish. I'm not selfish. I'm one of the most generous, giving people. I was before addiction. I was during addiction. And I am afterward. It's what it does, guys, whenever that's going on and you're in this almost panicked state of life and your experience, and you're afraid that, you know, if you confront me on my addiction, now I might have to give this thing up. So I'm going to protect this thing. That's what leads to that. And that's why maybe not arguing or debating is the best way to go. Not because you're letting anything go. See, you got to be careful because other programs will tell you that what you're doing there is you're enabling somebody. If you don't confront their behavior, you're enabling somebody. I think you're enabling somebody if you're paying for their rent while they're smoking crack cocaine. That's enabling somebody. But not, kind of not confronting somebody and not debating somebody and not yelling at somebody and not trying to put the hammer down on somebody. That's not enabling. That's just being smart. What is your goal? Your goal is to move the needle on recovery, right? It's not to win anything. I had a phone call. I'll never forget this. We do interventions a certain way here at Favor. We do not sneak up on people in an intervention. We don't do surprise attacks. You know the intervention show, A&E intervention show? Those are surprise attacks. They're inappropriate. They're made for TV. They're dramatic. We do this thing called an Arise intervention where we invite the person to the intervention. In other words, you're going to know there's going to be an intervention done on you. And it's not going to involve anything to do with you suck and this is how much you suck and you better go to rehab today. Very rarely does it ever have to get to that point. It's going to be basically, we love you and we want you to go get help. Well, I had a phone call from a man who was dealing with his brother, and I was explaining to him our intervention process, and he said, I don't think I want that. I don't like that. And I said, and we went back and forth, and he started asking me questions. He was a very informed shopper, okay? And he started asking me questions about are there other ways to do intervention? And I literally said to him, I said, sir, if you're looking to extract a pound of flesh from your brother, I can hook you up with some people who will punish him along the way. And he literally said, can you? He literally said, can you? And I did. I referred him to this woman who does interventions who I know would turn it into a brutal experience for the person. A demeaning, brutal experience for the person. If that's what you're looking for, that's fine, but understand you're not moving the person toward recovery, you're just getting revenge. And if what you're looking for, if you're looking for getting revenge, I'll be honest with you, you've absolutely come to the wrong place. If you're interested in any way getting even or a sense of justice or that kind of thing, Favor is just going to drive you crazy. Because what we believe is that recovery is available for everyone, and regardless of whether or not the person gets recovery, you as a family member have a right to a little bit more peace. And a little bit more peace can be attained in a whole lot of different ways, including toning it down a little bit. How do I want to say it? Ending the fight, if you will. Letting go of the idea that you're actually going to get the person that you're going to force the person into doing anything. You may change your behavior where the person will move in another direction because maybe you do stop paying the rent if you're paying the rent and the person's using, or maybe you do stop paying the car insurance while they're drinking and driving. Don't get me wrong, there are clear things that you can do. Does that make sense to everybody? There are absolutely clear things that you can do. There are things that were going on with me that made it easier for me to use and easier for me to escape situations. I'm not saying you don't do that. But I'm just saying you don't have to do it in a way where you're going to win anything. Nobody's going to win anything. It's just, can you move the person further along? All right, I want to give a couple other things in South Carolina, and this may or may not apply to your situation. I'm not at all telling you that you should do this, but these are options that do exist in South Carolina related to crisis. This is actually regarding mental health commitment, okay? You can commit people for a mental health issue, and you can commit people for a substance use disorder issue. This basically says how you can do it. You can do it through an emergency process, or you can have a full-blown judicial hearing. This is available on the South Carolina website. If you go on, all they're going to do is direct you to probate court. It is an option if you feel like a person is a danger to themselves or someone else. There's also a way to do it if you feel like their drug use or their alcohol use is a danger to themselves. You can't really do it for drinking and driving alone. But if you feel like the person is drinking or using drugs to a point where they're a physical danger to themselves, you can commit them. And again, this is all done through your local mental health, wherever you are. Like if you're in Greenville, if you're in the city, you're going to go to Greenville County Mental Health. If you're in Greer, you're going to go to Greer Mental Health. I just want to make sure people are aware of those options. And the other thing with crisis, I want to encourage a couple things with crisis. So this is what happens during a crisis cycle. This is basic stuff. This isn't just related to substance abuse. This would be any situation where you're getting aggravated. This could be if you're talking to your spouse about something. This could be if you're talking to somebody at work. This is what goes on emotionally. You're thinking, you're reasonable, you're logical. This part of your brain is running the show. You're having a clear debate. Life's going good. You know, your wife or your husband or your kid comes in and they smell like alcohol and their eyes are all glassy. They were out again doing it. You immediately start to get escalated. What happens? Your blood pressure goes up. I don't know if you know this or not, but your field of vision narrows. The part of your brain that does reasonable thinking goes away and is replaced by what? Concrete, illogical, unfocused. You're now at this point where have you ever heard the phrase, I can't think straight? This is, I can't think straight. So now you're in the middle of a crisis trying to figure out how to handle it and get an answer to a situation that, the gentleman who talked at the beginning of the meeting was talking about how confusing these situations can be and what do we even do and how do we even handle it. You don't know who to call or you don't know where to go and should we go to rehab or should we call the police. You're in the middle of it trying to figure it out and your brain is least equipped to handle it. This is you when you found your son that night. Now, this is where everybody in the room has to kind of develop their own crisis plan. This isn't going to be the same for everybody. But what kind of things do you think you can do to deal with it when you're in this state of mind that you can't think clear? Anybody have any suggestions or ideas to throw out there? How can you better handle this situation whenever it's up here?
Somebody else?
So talking to somebody. And I want to encourage you to literally have a list, a realistic list of who you can talk to that's going to help you come out of this state. If it's your spouse, that's fine. Sometimes you need somebody outside of the family. If it's a coach, you got to talk to the coach before that. Here's what the coaches of favor are instructed. I do not micromanage how they manage their boundaries. If they take a phone call after hours, that's up to them. But you can't expect them to do that. You have to have that conversation. Do you follow me? We will be establishing just a standard on-call line. We don't have it right now. We have a specialized program that we're trying to help people dealing with opioids, but we're going to start a 24-hour on-call line. You could use that. That would be somebody to call. But you wouldn't know them necessarily. Who else could you call? Where else could you get support? Friends, family, coach, sponsor, therapist, whoever else you can talk to. What's going to happen if you start talking to somebody? You're going to start to calm down. Why? First of all, you're going to talk a mile a minute. It's just, I can't believe it. Here's what happened. He was over at his house. He came back. I know he's using for sure. I know. What do you think they were using? I don't know. They got all kinds of weird stuff going on over there. I think they're licking cane tones over there. That kind of thing. You're going to talk it out, and the more you talk, you're going to process it. All right? They're probably if they know you, or if they're the favor on-call line, they're probably going to be able to give you a little bit of advice. Would you agree with that?
Yes.
I don't suggest you call somebody who you have, like your college roommate, who you haven't talked to for 20 years. You want somebody who knows something about what you're dealing with and who's probably going to give you some words of wisdom. Whenever you called the on-call line, it was helpful, right? So that's going to get you out of yourself. Now, the other part of it is, after you come, here's the other part. You got to take a breath. You got to breathe in the middle of a crisis. You got to bring your physiology down. You got to take a breath, and you got to slow it down. You got to create space between you and the decision. And what do I mean by the decision? Maybe not even the decision, you and the action. Saying all those things that you don't want to say, making all those threats that you're not ready to make. You have to calm down. Slow is smooth and smooth is quick. Anybody know what movie that's from? I'll give you a free favor wristband.
Say it again.
What is it?
Say it again.
Slow is smooth and smooth is quick.
SWAT.
No, it's a movie called Shooter. Mark Wahlberg was in it. Yep. He's a sniper and he's teaching that guy how to shoot. Slow is smooth and smooth is quick. So slow it down. This is counterintuitive to slow it down. And what I mean by slow it down is slow down the decision-making process. You know, what do you have to figure out right this minute? What I've noticed when somebody's in a crisis, they want to solve the problem when? Now. So slowing it down is going to be counterintuitive, but why do you want to slow it down? What's the logical reason to slow it down?
Less arguing.
What's that?
Less arguing.
Less arguing. It's going to go better. It's going to be a calmer experience. Also, you're probably going to be able to make better decisions. You're probably going to be able to think it through once you bring yourself down. And again, you want to be asking, what needs to be happening right now? What do I need to do right now? Is this a danger where I need to call the police right now, right this minute? Is this a danger where I need to get in my car and drive over and start this paperwork and get this kid taken to the hospital to get evaluated right now? You're not trying to figure out what needs to go on 6 months from now. You're not trying to figure out anything other than what do I need to do? Because remember, this is a crisis. This isn't a recovery plan. This is a crisis. This implies that it's hitting the fan. Here's what I'm going to tell you. A lot of times, what feels like a crisis and what you've identified as a crisis really isn't a crisis. The person's probably not in any more danger today than they were yesterday. You just found out about it today. And it feels that way because the fear is kicking in. What would fall into the immediate crisis? Obviously like an overdose. Obviously threatening to kill themselves or threatening to kill somebody else. That's the kind of stuff that I'm talking about. And then try to go back to a plan. Try to have a plan. Just other things. And this is where you start talking about setting boundaries. You don't want to talk about the actual boundaries during the crisis. This is not the time to say you're going to have to leave the house. Because what's it about? It's about the now. What needs to happen now? I haven't seen him for 4 days. I'm calling the police and I'm making a missing persons report. Boom. That's what has to happen now. I may have to talk about boundaries, but I'm going to do that at another time. Whenever it's what? Calm. You don't want to confront somebody when they're drinking whenever they're already drunk. I mean, that's hard to do. Talking to drunk people is really difficult. It is. Another thing, do this beforehand. Identify who else needs to be on the team, who else needs to agree. This is very important for moms and dads. Whether you're, co-parenting, happily married, unhappily married, whatever it might be, you got to be on the same team when you talk to the person. All this stuff needs to go into it. Identify the message. What's going to be the recovery message? What are we going to be asking this person to do? Do we know what we're going into this conversation with? Do we need to rehearse it? Do we want them to go to rehab? No, we're not really thinking rehab is necessary. Do we want them to go to meetings? Do we want them to just acknowledge what happened? You guys, what are you asking for? Needs to be very, very clear. And sometimes that isn't so clear. And then again, we've talked about this, but you don't want to say the first thing that comes to your mind. You want to ask yourself a couple questions along the way. What is my intention? Am I saying this to hurt the person? We all have said things to our kids out of anger. We've all said things to our spouse out of anger where it wasn't necessarily to make the situation any better. It was to put them in their place. And I've done that. Everybody in this room has done that. If you say you haven't, you're in denial. But we love you anyway because we love people in denial. But we've all done that. We've all said something, and we've said it from a place of righteousness. We've said it from a place of we are the person who's doing the right thing. But remember, guys, it isn't about letting them get over on anything. It just isn't going to do you any good. Think about it as it's almost, I hate to turn it into like a business strategy or a game. I'm not trying to turn it into a game. But it is something where the objective here is, what do I say to this person in this moment that's going to move them further along toward anything related to recovery? And if just laying them out will do that, I don't believe it will. But if it will, actually, I can't even endorse that. I mean, all right. And then walk it through, try to do it calmly. We've gone over this. Boundaries exist to define how you want to be treated, not to define how the other person needs to behave. We've done mean what you say what you mean, but don't say it mean. What gets in the way of follow through? Usually it's fear. Fear and guilt are the two things that keep people from following through on boundaries. Fear of the worst. If I set these boundaries, this person's going to wind up living on the street and they're going to wind up drinking more or using more, that kind of thing. Guilt, I always say guilt or buyer's remorse is maybe we were too hard on them, maybe we really didn't need to go that far. That kind of stuff. After we do it, we can't really follow through. And then this, and another fear of hesitation, fear or hesitation, and this is I don't know whether this is the case or not. I'm just putting it out there if it is. Sometimes this goes back to my original point around stigma. I believe that one of the underlying things, especially early on, why people have trouble setting boundaries is they're afraid that things are going to get worse and that people are going to find out what's going on. And if I say so-and-so can't come on the beach vacation with us because every time they come on the beach vacation, they get hammered, drunk, and it's embarrassing, I'm going to have to answer and say, where are they at? Or if I send my kid to rehab, I'm going to run into somebody in the grocery store and when they ask me what's going on with Johnny, I'm going to have to explain he's at rehab. That kind of stuff will sometimes keep people from setting boundaries. It'll keep people from stepping out on a limb and doing difficult things. If that is part of what it is, I'm telling you, you got to develop this mindset. You do not need the approval of anybody that would judge you for your child or your spouse having a medical condition. You do not need their approval. I don't care if you've known them for 25 years. They're your best friend, they're your family, or whatever. If that's who they are as a person, now you might want to give them a moment to be able to explain to them what's going on. And like as Jen said, she tries to educate people. I'm not saying you write people off immediately. But if you feel like you've tried to put this out to people who you care about and they care about you and they still make you feel that way, you don't have any time in your life for anybody who's going to drag you down. If you're dealing with this issue, you need all your emotional reserves to deal with the issue at hand. And the issue at hand isn't whether or not my neighbor approves of me. The issue at hand is my 18-year-old son or my 19-year-old daughter or my 32-year-old son or my spouse. Do you follow me? That's the issue that you're dealing with. And it's going to take all your emotional reserves to sleep at night while you're dealing with that. If you have people in your life and you're done interacting with them and you walk away and you feel worse about it, it's time to really seriously reevaluate those relationships. And the reason why I say this, guys, I call it the Facebook. My wife calls Facebook fake book. Okay? And it's not just fake book. It's, look, we live in the most superficial culture that human beings have ever experienced. We live in the least authentic world that we have ever been exposed to. Even being authentic has become fake. because authentic has become a buzzword. There's two words you hear a lot about in my world, in the therapy world: authentic and vulnerable. And I love it when I go to meetings and I see all these like 22-year-old dudes and they're all being vulnerable. They don't even know what the hell they're thinking. They don't know where they are, what day of the week it is, but they're all vulnerable, man, and authentic, right? So now this is a dangerous period of time. Dealing with active addiction is a dangerous period of time to be comparing yourself to the images of what you see other places. Every family is dealing with something. Every family has a skeleton in the closet. Every family, or however you want to think about it, whatever works for your worldview. Everybody's a sinner. Whatever works for your worldview. Understand though, it's gonna tear you down. And what I would recommend is that you put this stuff on hold and you reevaluate these relationships while you're going through this stuff that you're dealing with your loved one, until you feel really, really solid. And that also includes family. That also includes family if necessary. If you come out of conversations with people feeling worse, temper those conversations until things get solid. And then if you want to go back in there and fix them, or if you want to go back into the lion's den and deal with that, then you can deal with that. But you need your time and energy and your worries and stress and stuff like that, again, depending on where you're at in this process. This is heavy lifting. This is an emotionally difficult thing to deal with. This is a anxiety-producing circumstance. And so does the idea of not adding other anxiety-producing circumstances where they can be avoided, does that make sense? That's all I'm encouraging you to do with this. And actually, I'm in a salty mood tonight. I just got a problem with people who judge other people. I just got a big problem with people who judge other people. Don't come into a circumstance and cast stones. And you want to know, because give me 15 minutes with you. I'll tell you what's wrong with you. Seriously, we all have stuff. That is not a cliche. We all have stuff. We had it, growing up. We have it now. Nobody's kids are perfect. Nobody's family's perfect. And addiction will magnify that. That is taking kerosene and pouring it on a fire. All right. Good deal. You can tell I was just on vacation. I was around a bunch of family who always wanted to know what's going down, man. What's happening? What's been going on, man? What you been up to, man? What do you do for a living, dude? Oh, well, I'm working in a nonprofit. Oh, that's cool. Yeah. I run a Fortune 500 company. What kind of car are you driving? Shut your mouth. All right. That's all. Everybody calm down a little bit. We will be here again next Monday. And next week, Carol, by the way, you got a shout out at the beginning of the meeting. Let's give Carol a hand. They said that you did a better job than me and they didn't want me coming back. So I'm not sure how I feel about that, but we can talk afterward. Next week, if you haven't been to a regular meeting, it's a little different. We'll just have the chairs configured a little bit differently, and it's an open chair. It's not really a lecture. And so I would encourage you to come to that. Same time, 6:30 next Monday. Does anybody else have any other announcements related to anything, favor related? Carol, am I missing anything?
Did you do the sign-in sheet?
I did.
Yeah, okay.
I did the sign-in sheet, and
You didn't mention that number.
no, I didn't. I'm going to move that to a general, like on-call line, and I was going to wait. So, if nothing further, if we could get a moment of silence, please, for those still suffering with this disease, and for the family members brought into this no choice of their own, followed by the serenity prayer. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. All right, good deal. All right, brother. Come check out a meeting.
Oh, I will.
Okay, good.
I will.
Good. Nice. Yes.
That friend that you wrote.